They put on the uniform of a nation that did not treat them as equals. During World War, African American soldiers were asked to defend democracy, freedom, and human dignity across the world while being denied many of those same rights at home. They trained in segregated camps, served in separate units, and were often told they were unfit for combat. Yet when the moment came, they marched forward anyway. Imagine boarding a train bound for war, knowing that you could be called boy in your own country, even while risking your life for its future. Imagine fighting an enemy overseas, while another form of injustice followed you everywhere into barracks, onto buses, and back home after the war ended. This was the reality for more than 1 million African American men who served during World War I. Their story is not just about uniforms and battlefields. It is about courage under pressure, dignity in the face of exclusion, and the determination to prove through action that patriotism does not have a color. These soldiers built supply lines that kept armies moving, flew missions that protected bombers in hostile skies, and fought on the front lines when others said they could not. They did all of this while knowing their sacrifices might never be fully acknowledged. Tonight, we take you into the untold experiences of black soldiers during World War I, stories of heroism, resilience, and quiet defiance that helped reshape America itself. This is not only history, it is a reminder of how progress is often earned long before it is recognized. If you value stories that reveal the deeper truths behind world-changing events, support the channel by liking this video, sharing it with others, and subscribing for more powerful historical narratives. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Despite the barriers placed before them, African American soldiers did not remain on the margins of the war. After leaving segregated training camps behind, they stepped into a global conflict that demanded endurance, precision, and sacrifice on a scale few could have imagined. While the nation debated their worth, these men were already proving it quietly, steadily, and often without recognition. Far from the front lines, long columns of trucks moved through darkness and shattered roads, carrying the lifeblood of the Allied advance. Many of the drivers behind the wheels were black soldiers, navigating unfamiliar terrain under constant threat, delivering fuel, food, ammunition, and medical supplies that kept entire armies alive. Their work rarely made headlines. Yet every mile they drove brought the war closer to its end. Without these supply lines, victories on the battlefield would have collapsed into chaos, and momentum would have vanished just when it mattered most. In the skies above Europe and the Mediterranean, African American aviators challenged not only enemy aircraft but deeply rooted assumptions about who belonged in the cockpit. Trained under intense scrutiny, they flew mission after mission with discipline and precision, escorting bombers through hostile airspace and returning again and again despite losses. Their performance forced even their harshest critics to confront an uncomfortable truth. Skill and courage could not be limited by race. Each successful mission reshaped perceptions, not through speeches, but through undeniable results. On the ground, the war demanded even more, as Allied forces pushed deeper into enemy territory and casualties mounted. Black soldiers were increasingly called upon to fight where conditions were harshest. Tank crews rolled forward under fire. Infantry units advanced through frozen forests and ruined towns. And support troops found themselves facing danger they had never been expected to encounter. In these moments, there was no separation between belief and reality, only survival, trust in the soldier beside you, and the shared determination to endure. What made these contributions so powerful was not only their effectiveness, but the contrast they revealed. The same men trusted with complex machinery, life or death decisions, and the fate of entire operations were often denied basic respect within their own ranks. They lived with this contradiction daily, carrying it into battle and back again, choosing professionalism over resentment, and resolve over despair. Their service became a form of quiet resistance, a living argument against the limitations imposed upon them. As the war progressed, It became impossible to ignore what African American soldiers had accomplished. Commanders who once doubted them relied on them. Units once sidelined were sent where the fighting was fiercest. The evidence accumulated not in words, but in results. Roads secured. Skies defended. Towns liberated. And lives saved. These achievements did more than help defeat an external enemy. They weakened an internal injustice that had long gone unchallenged. By the time the war drew toward its end, the contributions of black soldiers had woven themselves into the fabric of Allied victory. They had carried the weight of the war across continents. Often unseen, often unthanked, yet undeniably essential, their service did not immediately erase discrimination, but it changed the conversation forever. Through action rather than demand, they proved that courage, competence, and loyalty belonged to no single group, and that the fight for equality had already begun, long before the battlefield fell silent. Within this broader struggle, moments of individual courage cut through the noise of prejudice and doubt, leaving marks that could not be erased. Among those moments stands the story of Doris Miller, a man whose actions reshaped how a nation saw both heroism and those it had long refused to fully recognize. His bravery did not come from ambition or defiance, but from instinct and responsibility, born in an instant when hesitation meant death. Miller entered the U.S. Navy as a mess attendant, a role assigned not by choice but by policy. Like many African American sailors of his time, he was confined to service duties, trained to cook and clean rather than fight. Yet when war arrived without warning on a quiet December morning in 1941, the boundaries imposed on him collapsed in the face of chaos. As bombs fell and fire consumed the deck of the USS West Virginia, Miller did not wait for instructions that would never come. He carried wounded shipmates to safety, moving through smoke and explosions, returning again and again while the ship burned around him. When there was no one left to carry, Miller turned toward the fight itself. He manned an anti-aircraft gun he had never been formally trained to use, aiming skyward as enemy planes roared overhead. In those minutes, rank, race, and assignment ceased to matter. What remained was a sailor defending his ship, his fellow crew members, and his country. Witnesses later recalled his calm under pressure, his steady hands, and his refusal to abandon his post until the danger had passed. News of Miller's actions traveled quickly through African American communities, even as official recognition moved slowly. For Black Americans who had been told repeatedly that they were unfit for combat or leadership, his story carried profound meaning. Miller did not deliver speeches or lead protests, yet his courage spoke with undeniable clarity. He became a symbol of what had always been true but rarely acknowledged. That opportunity, not ability, had been the missing factor. Miller's heroism resonated far beyond Pearl Harbor. At a time when the military insisted on segregation as a matter of efficiency and discipline, his actions exposed the weakness of that argument. If a man trained for the kitchen could rise instinctively to defend a battleship under fire, what did that say about the policies that had kept him from training as a gunner in the first place? Questions like this began to echo quietly through the ranks and into the public consciousness. His life was cut short when he was later killed in action, never witnessing the changes his courage helped set in motion. Yet the impact of his example endured. Miller's name became a reference point in discussions about fairness, capability, and belonging within the armed forces. Over time, his story joined countless others often overlooked, often delayed in recognition that collectively undermined the logic of segregation. In the unfolding narrative of World War I, figures like Doris Miller transformed individual bravery into collective momentum. Their actions did not immediately dismantle discrimination, but they accelerated its unraveling by proving their worth in the most unforgiving circumstances imaginable. These individuals forced the military, and eventually the nation, to confront a truth it could no longer deny. Heroism once witnessed so clearly, had a way of changing minds, and in doing so, it pushed history forward one decisive moment at a time. As individual acts of courage reshaped perceptions, entire units soon carried that burden forward on a far larger scale. Among them was the 761st Tank Battalion, a group of African American soldiers whose very existence challenged long-held assumptions about who could fight, lead, and endure under the most extreme conditions of modern warfare. Known as the Black Panthers, they entered Europe not as symbols, but as soldiers expected to perform where failure was not an option. Their journey to the front lines had been long and marked by doubt. Trained for years in the United States, often kept waiting while others were sent overseas. The men of the 761st understood that hesitation was not about readiness, but about prejudice. By the time they finally arrived in France in late 1944, they carried more than weapons and equipment. They carried the weight of expectation placed on them by a system eager to judge them more harshly than anyone else. Assigned to General George Patton's Third Army, the battalion was quickly thrown into some of the most demanding combat of the war. Winter settled across Europe, turning roads into mud and fields into frozen traps for tanks and infantry alike. Towns had to be taken street by street, often under relentless fire, with little rest between engagements. For the Black Panthers, there were no easy assignments and no pauses to regroup. From the moment they entered combat, they fought continuously for months, moving forward as others rotated out. Their most defining test came during the Battle of the Bulge, when German forces launched a desperate counteroffensive through the frozen forests of the Ardennes. Conditions were brutal. Snow, fog, and bitter cold reduced visibility and strained both men and machines. Enemy fire was constant, and supply lines were stretched thin. In this case, the 761st was sent into critical positions, tasked with holding ground and supporting infantry under some of the harshest circumstances of the war. Tank crews advanced through narrow roads and shattered villages, and knowing that enemy armor and hidden defenses waited beyond every bend. Losses were real and deeply felt, yet the battalion continued to press forward, adapting quickly, coordinating with infantry units, and maintaining discipline even when exhaustion set in. Their effectiveness was not measured only in territory gained, but in the lives they protected and the stability they provided in moments when collapse seemed possible. What set the 761st apart was not just bravery, but consistency. Day after day, they delivered results. Commanders who had once questioned their abilities came to rely on them, assigning them to missions where reliability mattered most. Their tanks supported breakthroughs, held defensive lines, and helped liberate towns that had lived under occupation for years. With every engagement, the idea that African American soldiers could not perform in combat became harder to sustain. Yet even as their reputation grew on the battlefield, recognition lagged behind. Praise was often private, commendations delayed or overlooked, and their story rarely reached the broader public. Still, within the ranks, respect was earned through action. Fellow soldiers, regardless of background, learned to trust the Black Panthers beside them, because in battle, performance mattered more than prejudice. By the time the war in Europe neared its end, the 761st Tank Battalion had fought across multiple countries, endured some of the longest continuous combat of any American unit, and helped shape the outcome of key operations. Their service did more than contribute to victory. It exposed the contradiction at the heart of a segregated military. Through endurance and effectiveness under fire, the Black Panthers demonstrated that excellence could not be confined by policy, and that history, once confronted with undeniable evidence, would eventually be forced to change. While African American soldiers were proving their worth through action on distant battlefields, another front of the war was unfolding back home. One fought not with weapons but with words, ideas, and moral pressure. This struggle took shape in black newspapers, community organizations, and living rooms across the country, where the contradictions of the war were openly confronted. The same nation that declared itself the defender of freedom was maintaining segregation within its own military and society, and the black press refused to let that contradiction pass unnoticed. African American newspapers became a lifeline between soldiers overseas and the communities they left behind. Letters from servicemen were published regularly, offering first-hand accounts of discrimination, frustration, and determination. These were not complaints meant to weaken morale, but testimonies that demanded honesty. Soldiers wrote about wearing the uniform with pride while being denied equal treatment, about guarding enemy prisoners who enjoyed freedoms they themselves lacked, and about returning from missions only to face restrictions imposed by their own side. Through these voices, the reality of the war reached millions of readers who understood that the fight for democracy could not be separated from the fight for dignity. Out of this shared awareness emerged the WWII campaign, a simple yet powerful idea that captured the moment with striking clarity. Victory abroad against fascism meant little, black journalists argued, if victory at home against racism remained unfulfilled. The campaign spread rapidly, carried by newspapers, churches, and community groups that encouraged African Americans to support the war effort while also demanding fairness and accountability. It was not a rejection of patriotism, but a deeper expression of it, rooted in the belief that the nation could and should live up to its stated ideals. Civil rights organizations amplified this message with careful strategy. Groups such as the NAP documented cases of unequal treatment, pressed military leaders for change, and used legal and political channels to challenge discriminatory practices. Their efforts were measured and persistent, aimed at exposing hypocrisy without undermining the war itself. By framing equality as essential to national unity and strength, they made it harder for policymakers to dismiss their demands as disruptive or disloyal. What made this movement especially powerful was its connection to the lived experiences of soldiers. The heroism of men like Doris Miller and the effectiveness of units such as the 761st Tank Battalion provided undeniable evidence that segregation was not only unjust, but illogical. The black press did not need to exaggerate. The facts themselves carried weight. Each success on the battlefield strengthened the argument that exclusion had always been based on assumption rather than reality. As the war continued, this steady pressure began to shift public perception. White newspapers, political leaders, and military officials could no longer ignore the growing conversation. The idea that America was fighting for freedom abroad while denying it at home became a question that demanded an answer. The WWII campaign ensured that this question remained visible, refusing to let sacrifice go unrecognized or unchallenged. By the time the war neared its end, the groundwork for change had been laid. The voices raised by the black press and civil rights organizations had transformed individual frustration into collective purpose. They connected the courage of soldiers overseas with the conscience of the nation itself, making clear that victory would only be complete when it was shared. In doing, they ensured that the struggle for equality was not postponed until after the war, but recognized as an inseparable part of it. As World War I drew to a close, countless African American soldiers returned home carrying the weight of both extraordinary service and lingering injustice. Their experiences on foreign battlefields starkly contrasting with the discrimination they still faced in their own country. Men who had fought with valor in the skies over Italy, across the fields of France, and in the mechanized assaults led by units like the 761st Tank Battalion had proven beyond doubt their competence, courage, and commitment to the ideals of freedom and democracy. Yet, stepping off the transport ships and trains, they were often met with segregation, denial of basic rights, and the uncomfortable reminder that their heroism abroad did not automatically translate into equality at home. These veterans, however, did not allow these obstacles to diminish the significance of what they had achieved or the influence they could wield in shaping the future. Their service became a moral and political lever, highlighting the stark contradiction between fighting tyranny overseas and enduring systemic racism at home, and compelling lawmakers, military leaders, and the public to confront the glaring inequities embedded within American society. In 1948, President Harry Truman's Executive Order 9981 formally desegregated the U.S. forces, a landmark decision owed in no small part to the sacrifices, perseverance, and undeniable excellence of black servicemen during the war. The bravery demonstrated by figures like Doris Miller, the strategic effectiveness of the Black Panthers, and the relentless advocacy of civil rights organizations showcased the undeniable truth that African American soldiers were indispensable to the nation's defense. Beyond the military, these veterans returned to communities inspired to continue the fight for civil rights, drawing from their shared experiences to organize, protest, and advocate for equal treatment. Their wartime contributions laid the groundwork for the sweeping transformations of the 1950s and 1960s, shaping the civil rights movement by providing both a powerful narrative of courage and a clear, lived example of African Americans' rightful place in American society. Today, as we reflect on the legacies of these men, it becomes evident that their story is not just one of combat, strategy, and heroism, but also of enduring resilience, moral clarity, and an unwavering pursuit of justice. The black soldiers of World War I remind us that true patriotism is measured not only in battlefield victories, but in the courage to challenge injustice and demand equality. By honoring their legacy, we ensure that their sacrifices are never forgotten, and that the lessons they impart continue to inspire future generations to strive for a more inclusive and equitable world. Thank you for joining us in uncovering this vital chapter of history. If you found this story enlightening, please support the channel by liking the video, subscribing for more historical narratives, and sharing this journey with your friends and family. Your support keeps these important stories alive and helps us continue to explore the untold experiences that have shaped our world.